Code Crush Coding. In the previous video, we have learned the concept of polymorphism. So we have understood that polymorphism are of two types: runtime polymorphism and compile time polymorphism. So runtime polymorphism is achieved by method overriding that we have already covered in the previous video. In this video, we will cover about compile time polymorphism, which can be achieved with the help of method overloading. So what is meant by overloading? So if a class has multiple methods, so in a class you can have a multiple methods, but if you provide a same name to all these methods but different in parameters, it is known as method overloading. So basically method overloading can be achieved by providing a same method name inside the class, but they have the different number of parameters or the different type of parameters. So method overloading should have the same method name, different argument types, like if one method has the argument type as integer and string, so another should have like float or integer, like different argument types, or by changing the number of arguments. So these are the three simple ways that should be satisfied for the method overloading. So let's see in practical implementation how we can achieve this method overloading. But the question arises, why we need method overloading? Why we can't provide different names to a method? So consider a situation where you want to add numbers. So you will provide the method name as add. So in the first method, you will have the add method name and you can have two argument types. Let's say two numbers, integer and integer. But it can also be case when you want to add three numbers. So you will also provide the method name as add. And again, you will have the three parameters, integer, integer, integer. Also, it can be case that you need to add four integers. So again, the method name will be add, but this time the number of arguments will be 4. So let's see this particular case inside the practical code. So here I have the class demo. Inside this class, I have one main method. Now what we will do, we will create another class, and inside that class, we will achieve this method overloading. Now let's create a class. So let's say class, and let's give the name of class as overloading. So this is the name of class overloading, and inside this class we will have one method. Now let's provide the method name as public, and let's say here void, instead of void let's say int add, and this method takes two arguments. Let's say int num1 comma int num2, and here inside this method we will return num1 plus num2. So what this method is doing, this method is taking two arguments of integer type and returning the result by adding these two numbers. And inside this class, what we will do, we will create the object of this overloading class. Let's create the object of overloading class, overloading object equal to new overloading, and let's call the method add here obj dot add, and let's pass the two arguments, let's say 1 and 2. As this method is returning, let's pass this particular statement in sysout. So let me print here sysout statement, and now if I try to run this class, now let's see the output. So we are getting here 3. So what is happening, we are calling this particular method add, and this is returning us the result. So 1 plus 2 is 3. Now if I want to add 3 integers, let's say 1, 2 and 3. So this time the code will give me an error. Why it is giving error? Because this particular add method can take only 2 arguments, right? It cannot take the third argument. So we need to declare a method here. So we want to add 3 numbers now. So you need to declare a method public. Again, it will return the integer type and the method name is add, because we want to perform the add operation. And now instead of 2 arguments, I can have 3. So num1 int num2 int num3. So these are my 3 arguments, and this will return me return num1 plus num2 plus num3. So what has happened here? here the method name is same. Okay, add and add. As you can see here, method name should be same, different argument types. So here we have the argument type 2 argument, and here we have 3 arguments, so different argument types. And also by changing the number of arguments, so here we have 2, here we have 3, and also here we have integer 2, here we have 3 integers. So all these conditions are satisfied, so there are no errors, and we have overloaded this particular add method. And now if you try to call, let me call this add now with 3 arguments instead of 2. Now I will call it with 3. So what is happening internally? So when I call this add method with 2 arguments, so it will call this add with 2 arguments. If we call the add method with passing 3 arguments, so it will call this particular add method. If I run this code, now see, here we are getting 1 plus 2 3, which is getting from this particular add method, and now this 1 plus 2 3 and 3 plus 3 6 we are getting from this particular add method. Now let's say instead of providing the integer type, now I want to add from the float type. Now let's say I want to have this case here, sysout. Let me call this add obj.add, and if I try to call the 1.1 f, I want to call the float values now instead of integer types. Let's say 2.1 f. Now there is no method to call the float type because these are integer types. Now I want to again can say here public. Now this time it will return me the float value, so I will provide here the float and then say add, and now we are expecting to get the float values, so I will need to declare here float. Let's say num1 float num2, and inside this I will return here return num1 plus num2. Now here you can see this particular method name is same, and also 2 arguments. Here also we have 2 arguments, but the type of argument is different, right? We have here float and here integer. Now let's run the code again. Now let's run this code. So see, we are getting here 1.1 plus 2.1 addition here. So decimal addition is getting added here, and we are getting 2 plus 1 here 3. Now in this way you are able to overload the method by providing the same method name, and as per the requirement you can call this method. Now let's understand the another thing in method overloading. In Java, method overloading is not possible by changing the return type of the program due to avoid the ambiguity. So if you just change the return type of program and you expect that the code will run, so it is not the case. It will give you an error due to ambiguity. Let's see in this practical demo here. So let's say you only change the return type. So here we have 2 arguments, right? So instead of float, if you try to get here int, let's say int, and here also int, and you are returning these 2 values, and here you have integer type method, right? And here you have float return type. So here you have the different return types but the same number of arguments and type of arguments. So what will happen now if I remove this statement here? Now for this particular method add 1 comma 2, it has 2 options, right? It can also call this particular add, because here also we have integer and two arguments, and here also you have the 2 arguments. So this is an ambiguity issue to which add it will call, because the return type will not make a difference, right? When you are trying to call this particular add, it will search the add method with 2 arguments which are of integer type. So it will get 2 options here. So first option is this particular method with add and 2 integer type arguments, and second option is this at line number 10, method add and 2 integer arguments. So here you are getting the error which says duplicate method add int in type overloading. So you cannot overload a method by just changing the return type. You need to also change the number of arguments or the type of arguments. So I hope you have understood the concept of overloading here. So just remember these 3 things: it should have same method name, different argument types, or by changing the number of arguments. So now let's take another example here. So I have already copied this code inside our test.java file. So here we have a class adder. Inside this class we have two methods, which is add method and again add. So we have overloaded the method, but here the number of arguments are 2. Here also number of arguments are 2 and data type is also same. So we have just overloaded the method by changing the return type, and we have seen that by changing the return type the method loading will not work, because when here we are calling this add method with two integers, it have two options, right? This method also and this method. So it is an ambiguity issue to which method it should call. So that's why we are getting here error which says duplicate method add int type adder. So you cannot override a method by just simply changing the return type of method. Now what is the output of the following Java program? So let's copy this code and check in the Eclipse what we get. The output here, I have one class called test. Inside this class I have two methods which has a return type void, and we have changed the number of arguments here. Like here we have integer and long, and here we have long and integer, so different number of arguments, right? And we have a print message here. This says a method invoked and this says b method invoked. Okay, and now inside this test we have created one object of this test class. Now if you don't have this particular method, let's comment out this method here first. Let's say you have only one method here. So if I try to call this obj dot sum, and now first parameter for here is integer. Okay, so let's say 12 is the integer, and second one is long. So you can provide integer value here because integer value can be occupied inside this long data type as well. So if I run this code, so here I am getting a method invoke. So it is able to call this particular method because we have a single method here, right? And now if I remove this comment from this particular method, now here we are getting error. What error we are getting here? So the method sum is ambiguous for the type test. So what is happening here now? We are calling this sum method. So we do have two methods here with sum name, and now here 12. So 12 can also be treated as long. So which method to call? Because it has two options. Because this 12 can be considered here integer, it can also be considered long here, and also for this 13 it can be considered long here, also it can be considered integer here. So this is an ambiguity issue to which particular method you need to call. So I hope you have understood the concept of method overloading here. So do practice on the method overloading. That's it in this video. We will cover another topics in next video. Thank you for watching.